Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another Boom Time here with me, Scott Morrison, founder of The Boom and Fora. And of course, we are still in lockdown mode, so we are joining from my living room this evening. And as you know, we are here to talk about impact, because right now, that's what I'm really fascinated with. I'm fascinated about creating the future. I'm restless, I'm bored of people waiting for this thing called the new normal. And I want to pick you all up, give you inspiration. And we've curated this series with Fora to help you feel inspired from brilliant people who unlock, and unleash the future impact they want to see and are fundamentally disrupting their sector and industry. And tonight, ahead of the world-renowned London Fashion Week, what a great time to be talking about the future of fashion with the brilliant CEO of the British Fashion Council, Caroline Rush. Since her appointment as chief exec in 2009, she's focused on strengthening the British Fashion Council's network and platforms to connect businesses with global audiences in both trade and consumer worlds. And during this time, London Fashion Week has become a globally recognized platform for creative fashion talent. London Fashion Week Men's was launched in 2012, and more recently, the 4 fashion weeks in London have become gender neutral, with a pivot to digital for June 20 and beyond. The Fashion Awards has become the global awards ceremony for the fashion industry. In fact, not just the global awards ceremony for the fashion industry, and has raised millions for the BFC's charitable projects. The BFC has launched the Institute of Positive Fashion as an engine room for change, galvanizing the industry to address how it can more positively impact the environment, people, and community. And Caroline and her team have successfully pivoted London Fashion Week and the Fashion Awards to digital platforms. Caroline sits on the UK's Creative Industry Trade Board and also is the co-founder of LOCA, a platform and global community of brands and talent to connect more easily and collaborate more efficiently. My goodness, that took a lot of breath, but what a fantastic, fantastic.
That's good for a pick up on a Monday night.
Brilliant. It's brilliant to have you on tonight, Caroline, because I know how busy you and the team are getting ready for London Fashion Week and just how busy everything has been. For those who know, I recently joined the board as a non-exec director, so I work with Caroline quite closely. So we kind of know what's going on. But tonight is all about you and you know, there's the part of your story and part of your inspiration and fundamentally how you're shaping the future of fashion. And we've got loads of people on tonight. Just to remind us, the audience, please do look on the box on your screen. You'll see a Q&A box. Please ask us any questions, and those questions that we think are great, we'll ask Caroline live here tonight, so you'll get answers as well. But Caroline, just to start with, I want to go right back to the beginning. I always do in these moments, and I just want to know, where did your love for fashion start? Was there a moment or a story that you remember that really ignited that passion for you?
God, I've always loved the fashion industry, and I think probably it's my mum's fault is that delving into her wardrobe and, you know, back in the 80s, stealing her all-in-ones and dressing up, and she, you know, she was actually a domestic science teacher, went on to be deputy head, and she used to make clothes, encourage us to make clothes. And so there was a love not just of fashion and style, but the process and the, you know, the skill that goes into being to making clothes. So I think I was probably always destined to work in the fashion industry. Took a few kind of odd turns along the way, but did find myself, you know, really, I guess my first introduction to London Fashion Week was back when I was 27, and I was working for the then creative director of London Fashion Week, a lady called Annette Worsley-Taylor. And it was then really that I had found a love for British designers, really got to understand how incredibly creative they are and how that makes us really unique as a fashion nation.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you that because, you know, British fashion has a kind of a particular view and a particular place actually in the world. How would you describe it?
it is this sort of wealth of creative talent that comes through our incredible education system. You know, most of our fashion colleges are art colleges, and they really push that level of creativity. There are obviously fashion colleges around the world, but a lot of those focus on sort of the business of fashion and sort of creativity matched with business. But many of our colleges very much focus on just pushing that creativity. And you can see it with the incredible talent that comes through, which is why London Fashion Week as this global platform has a very, very unique place as being this capital of creativity, capital of innovation, and a place where people come to discover the newness and be inspired really for what follows around the rest of the world.
That's a really, it's great that we're talking about London Fashion Week, and of course the context of British fashion, because a great quote from the great, obviously, Hilary Alexander. Everyone knows her very well. In fact, I once won this really weird award from her at the clothes show live when I was at Levi's. We won store of the, or stand of the year or something there, and I met her there. She was fantastic. But she stated that you transformed London Fashion Week from being a poor cousin to Paris, New York, and Milan to showing that Britain is where it all begins. And that's a pretty big accolade.
It is, and it's very kind. And I think for those that know Hilary, she has incredible enthusiasm and energy. And my gosh, it's tough to match. It's a team effort, really, isn't it? Is that you don't do it alone. And I think of the incredible people that have been part of that sort of repositioning of London Fashion Week, including, you know, previous chairman. It was Stuart Rose and the CEO before me, Hilary Reaver, who really sort of set out the ambition and handed over the baton to go and deliver it. And the incredible chairman we've had along the way, you know, from Harold Tillman, Natalie Massenet, you know, of course, is that we've got brilliant Stephanie Fair now, and brilliant board members too. You know, you're definitely amongst one of those that challenge us to constantly keep pushing and go further. And you need that in your life, you know, is that you need people that are really going to sort of test you and challenge you and encourage you to do more. And the team at the British Fashion Council, this is like my opportunity. I'm sure I'll bang on about them all the time, but they are incredible. And they always have been. You know, it's back in 2009 when I took this role. We had a really great team. We built on that team. And the individuals that come in now continue to sort of match that high bar of accountability and purpose and real drive to support and underpin this brilliant industry that we work in.
And just staying focused on London Fashion Week. I mean, you can tell us a little bit about what's going to be happening, because obviously it starts on Friday. This is a completely, we're talking about changing the industry, creating the future. I mean, there's two massive things that we heard. One that we heard in the introduction about it being gender neutral, but also it's digital now. I mean, how do those two things play a role kind of in the future, and how do they come about, and what's the thinking behind it, and what can we expect to see?
Well, I think is that we've always in London embraced digital quicker than any other fashion capital. You know, we were the first fashion capital to live stream shows globally. We were the first. I remember when Natalie joined as chair, is writing a letter to all of the designers to say that there's this great platform, Instagram. You've got to embrace it. It's a way to directly connect with your consumer, you know, as well as tell the stories to media and retailers and stylists and celebrities and everyone else. And we've continued to do that. You know, is that working with tech partners, thinking about how digital can enable businesses. And of course, back when, it's nearly a year now, isn't it, when COVID really started to impact the UK, but the global industry really, and everyone around the world, is that we quickly realised that we weren't going to be in a position where we were going to be able to deliver usual fashion weeks. And so sort of the pivot to digital was very quick. We were the first fashion week to commit to hosting a digital fashion week. You know, back in June 2020, is that many of the designers didn't even have collections, but we needed this platform to be able to have conversations to reach global audiences. And I think sometimes people forget the London Fashion Week, of course, it's a platform to show incredible talent, but it's also a really powerful platform to communicate. And if you think about that moment in time, it was when really sort of the momentum was building around the Black Lives Matter movement. You know, there was a huge amount of anger in terms of what was happening in the world, what had gone before. And what we wanted to do was really make sure that London Fashion Week as a platform was able to host those conversations and be a place for debate around how our industry can change, to really have some of the difficult conversations around maybe why it hadn't changed in the past, all credit to, again, the team at the British Fashion Council taking on the challenge. I think we had 8 weeks to turn what was a physical event into a digital platform. And of course, the incredible creativity of our designers who turned around the idea of doing a physical show into a film, a 3D moment, a live stream, a conversation, a piece of poetry, whatever it might have been, to really sort of reach out to the world and to give their perspective on what was happening at that moment in time. Is that, gosh, when I think about the year we've had in Fashion Weeks, we then went to September and we were thinking we were getting back to, life as normal. And we had, some small events under COVID secure guidelines. We had a few challenges trying to get those signed off to make that happen. And that was a really great moment. It felt like hope and inspiration. And I have to say that every Fashion Week, no matter what is happening in the world, that creativity that comes out of it gives that feeling of hope and inspiration. And so, of course, we're back to full digital, but with collections Fashion Week. So really, this is our first full digital Fashion Week, launching in February. And again, is that it's this platform to connect, this platform to showcase, but platform for debate as well. And I think that cultural conversation and societal conversation happens in London more than anywhere else. Is that our designers have very strong points of view. We as an organisation have very strong values that feel it's an opportunity to use those platforms to talk about. But the one thing, no matter what is happening, is that the chaos of Brexit that is definitely having an impact on our industry at the moment, the challenges of COVID, we know come the morning of the 19th of February, when the schedule kicks off and we start to hear we've got this great piece of poetry that will launch London Fashion Week, is that you'll get that sense of our creativity and innovation that comes through our designers actually will inspire everyone. And that's what makes them so resilient and will allow them to get through this really, really difficult time.
Excellent. And again, I just look at everything that you just talked about there and everything we're talking about in general. I used to work in the fashion industry. Still connected to it, but I was obviously at Diesel and Levi's and various places, not high-end fashion, but, sort of contemporary in some respects and relatively premium. But I've seen a lot change even since I started working, and then subsequently since I've left it. And you're living with those changes as well as creating the change in the industry. So what are the 2 or 3 biggest changes that you've seen that are going to shape the future as you see it?
Well, I think is that this year is absolutely going to shape our industry. And although as a designer business or even any kind of creative business or retail business that might be listening to this, it's going to feel really painful at this moment in time. But what it has done is it's really challenged the industry to think differently. It's challenged the industry to think about how they can do things differently. And, we keep talking about, you mentioned at the top, we've launched our Institute of Positive Fashion. This is really the decade of change when not just the fashion industry, every industry and every individual has to think about their impact on the planet if we've got any chance of really protecting our planet for the future. And this has been a moment to actually take stock, to think about the amount of waste that's created in our industry, how processes could change, how we as an industry could change. And so if there's one positive to come out of this, is that I do believe that it will be this change to, sorry, is that puppy here?
Okay, yeah.
Joys of working from home, is that it will be this moment of change that will really get businesses to properly engage in the environmental challenge. I talked a little bit before about how we used London Fashion Week really as an opportunity to really start seriously thinking about diversity in our industry. And that's not just from a Black Lives Matter movement, but that plays into everything around gender, disability, mental wellness, everything that we need to think about to make sure that we are an industry that is responsible for the future, that provides, the equal opportunities that we want to provide, that is truly open to everybody. And that's a big challenge, I think, is that we think about London, and we're an incredible city that's really diverse, and the designers that are part of our schedule and are members of the British Fashion Council have never been more diverse, but actually there are still barriers that are in the way, and we need to make sure that collectively we break those down. So that's a really big challenge to get through. And then I guess as we move forward, it's really, how do we really think about reshaping, and what do we want to be known for the future? And this was a challenge that I had back in 2009. What do we want London to be known for? And I think we're at this moment where you really want the business that you work for and the industry that you work in to have real purpose and to have real impact. And I'm very fortunate at the British Fashion Council, we're a not-for-profit organisation. Everything that we do is about purpose and impact. And it's never felt more relevant to really focus on those elements in terms of how we bring that to the broader industry. So we're hoping that our Institute of Positive Fashion, and we will do everything to make sure that it is this catalyst for change in all of these areas across environment, people, our impact on community, because although the fashion industry is definitely leveled at not necessarily being the best in terms of environmental impact, is that it has a long way to go, is that it can be a force for good. And so let's use this opportunity for change to make sure that we are a force for good for the future.
Brilliant. And just on the diversity and inclusion part, I mean, there's a wonderful fashion influencer called Aruj Aftab who's done a fantastic campaign called Done with Diversity, and she had a question which was specifically, what is the British Fashion Council doing to enable diversity and inclusion from within? And then what are the kind of programs or thinking that's happening within the BFC that's hopefully going to help change and shape the way that the fashion industry as a whole embraces more inclusion?
Well, I think the first thing we had to do was look at us as an organisation and look at our hiring policies, look at the diversity across the board at all levels of the business, look at the diversity of our board to make sure that we've got that diverse thinking coming through. So we have an internal D&I working group, is that we have a brilliant workforce who were incredibly engaged in the conversation right from the get-go. And so we have great working groups and there's great processes coming through within. And then we have our external diversity inclusion committee that is looking at access, is looking at education, is looking at mentoring programs. It's challenging us on everything that we do to see what we could do better. And then there's also a group that's specifically looking at business policies to make sure that we're fit for the future. Because one of the things that we started, looking and talking to HR professionals and D&I professionals in the industry to think about, what allyship programs there are that we could look at that are already working in the industry that we could roll out. There were none. We were talking to Airbnb and, incredible businesses like that and the allyship programs they have. So it's how do we really embed within our industry this change, and don't be afraid to go to other sectors that maybe are doing it better, to share their knowledge, to fast track us through. So is that we have our working groups up and running. We're looking forward to sharing. We're literally finalising our plan for this year to get up and running. We look forward to sharing that and to really start measuring those results both from within and externally of the industry as well.
Brilliant. And one of the things that I was, just finding out more as I've been involved in the board meetings is just how much conversation is had with government and stuff, and representing the industry at a much bigger scale than, just what we call, I call it front end, the fashion shows and London Fashion Week. But there's a whole load of stuff that goes on in the background. You were mentioning earlier about Brexit and, how do we persuade the rest, because there's people on here from the rest of the world listening to this evening, might be thinking Brexit this and the UK isn't this. How do we make sure and persuade people that London and Britain is open for business? It's still a fantastic place to do fashion business and to come here post-Brexit. How do we do that?
Well, I think incredibly the fashion industry is a globally connected industry. And one of the things that I've been really championing from within is building really strong partnerships in other parts of the world. So whether that's within the EU, with department stores, with the independent retailers, with the media, the US, China, South Korea, Japan, really looking at these key markets and building partnerships there. And I have to say is that despite everyone thinking we were completely mad to leave the EU on the whole, from an international perspective, no matter whether you vote or not, is that was the perspective we were, getting through the fashion industry, is that they were also very keen that we maintain that bond, because is that power of global connectivity is felt not only in terms of doing business and of course trading and being able to sell fantastic fashion, but it is that it feels that, particularly when you talk about things like sustainability or diversity and inclusion, that we're an industry that can change if we come together. And that international connection is incredibly important. The fashion industry is a brilliant advert for what the UK stands for. If we are leaders in creativity and innovation, who doesn't want to be known as that for a nation? And I guess one of our frustrations with government is them really thinking about engaging in the fashion industry and really supporting us as a platform to be able to champion how brilliant the UK is and will be in the future.
Great. I'm just going to ask a question from the audience, if you don't mind, Caroline, because it's related to that. And of course, I think it's great. We're talking about how do we maintain these global relationships, and especially with the EU and everything else. Fiona from Hackney has said, could Caroline talk a little bit about the relationship between the BFC and the rest of the UK, so the Midlands and the North? And I guess that's in the context of the idea of levelling up. We're always talking, government's always talking about levelling up the other parts of the UK, and we can get very London centric. But what is out there for people outside of London from the British Fashion Council?
Yeah, I think it's a very fair question, because of course we talk a lot about London Fashion Week. London is our capital, and in the way that you have New York and Paris, and of course is that Milan in terms of fashion weeks, is we talk about these fashion capitals and how they connect. But is that our industry is definitely powered by the whole of the UK. We have 32 colleges throughout the UK that are responsible for creating incredible creatives. Well, actually not just creatives, but incredible individuals that contribute towards our fashion industry. There's manufacturing throughout the UK that work with many of our designer businesses. Is that there's many retailers throughout the UK, so the independent retailers, the online platforms, the service industries that are throughout the UK. And so we're very mindful actually of the levelling up agenda, and when we're thinking about particularly sort of big industrial interventions that need to happen. So when we're thinking about how the UK might lead in terms of circular fashion, it's going to need change throughout the UK. It's not just something that can be led from London or even just from London Fashion Week. This is something that as an industry, is that 2019, there were 890,000 people throughout the UK that work in the fashion industry. Is that how do we get all of those individuals to commit to change is one of the big challenges that we're looking at the moment.
Brilliant. And I must say, sorry, I said Fiona from Hackney, and it wasn't Fiona. She's called Fiona Hackney. At MMU. Don't worry, Fiona. I am a northerner myself. I'm from Preston originally. So
me too. I went to school in Chorley. So there we go.
Oh my gosh, I don't think I knew that.
We'll talk about that later.
We'll talk about it. No one can hear our school memories. Okay, so Caroline, I wanted to focus on you a little bit now, because it's lovely to hear about the BFC and what you're doing there and else. But I always ask this question to our guests on the show, because I think it's part of our unblocking. And I always ask people, if you were to wake up tomorrow morning and everything was how you wanted it to be in your role and the BFC and don't we join in? What would that look like? What would it look like if you woke up in that morning and went, wow, everything's exactly how I'd like it to be?
Well, first I'd have a puppy that wasn't barking, so my headphones in at the moment in time. Let me put my headphones in 1 second, bear with me. Apologies. It's that time of night when everyone comes home, isn't it? And they start to wake up.
I think everyone's very forgiving these days. There's not a dog or a child involved somewhere along the way.
Exactly, there's always someone. Hopefully that might help slightly drown us out. She will stop in a minute. What would it look like? So I guess is that it's all of the idea of, have we got to the point where actually we are thinking about the full circularity in the industry? is that all of the systems are in place, that there's a fantastic ecosystem around it, that the innovation that's coming through our universities are connected with industry, and we continue to innovate for the good of our industry, but the good of our planet as well. And that the creatives have the access to finance that they need to be able to build the businesses that they want. That there is access for everybody, no matter what walk of life they come from, to get into the industry, and there's a very clear vision of how they get in and how they get through. There are many challenges to get there, so is that sadly I don't think I'm going to get there tomorrow morning, but it would be lovely even just to see some of those come to fruition, and they're certainly top of mind, and they're one of the things that gets me out of bed every morning and get me excited about the job that I have to do every day.
And what, just on the theme of unblocking, because we always talk about, there's in order to make the future happen, in order to make impact happen, we've always got to overcome certain things. We've always got to actually spell out the things that we've got to overcome. What previously have you had to overcome during your tenure as CEO to help make your vision come alive? What are some big things that you've overcome?
Gosh, I mean, it feels like there've been so many, actually. I guess is that one of the things for the fashion industry is that we're an industry that is constantly changing, which is one of the reasons why I love it. But there are also there's a lot in the fashion industry that find it quite difficult to tackle change sometimes. And so one of the things that I've learned really is just to take people with you. I think probably when I first started in this role, I was much more as that we're going to do this. This needs to happen. Let's just make it happen. And then you spend so long trying to explain, why maybe there's an action or an initiative or a program. And actually, so just taking the time to explain the thought process and the end vision of where you're trying to get to, and take people with you. The other unblockers is that it's, more practical things really around access to finance, the challenge, the things that are kind of out of your control, which are very difficult sometimes to unblock. But I think with a bit of creativity and creative thinking, and you find ways through. So, is that we've just signed 2 really big partners for the British Fashion Council. TikTok have come on board as a partner for New Gen, which is the oldest in the original designer support scheme, originally supporting Alexander McQueen back in 1993. It has gone on to support so many brilliant creatives since then. Having a partner like TikTok on board to really think about how the TikTok creators can engage with new audiences and really challenge some of those businesses to think about not just creating beautiful product, but actually connecting with the consumer as well is really exciting for us. And then we also signed Clearpay as a principal partner of London Fashion Week. Now, we haven't had a principal partner of London Fashion Week for some years. And to be able to sign a partner like that during a challenging year such as this, I think is such a signal of confidence in London Fashion Week, in creativity and talent. And again, that's all credit to the combined work of the team. It's the, digitizing the platform, it's continuing to innovate, it's being able to reach out and build trust with our partners, actually, so they come with you. Is the team at TikTok and the team at Clearpay is that we've known for several years, and we've been talking to them about the opportunities, and it's fantastic to see that come to fruition. So I think trust in what you're doing, and constantly, believe in the team around you, and yeah, you usually find a way through, I think.
So how do you we're going to think about unlocking now, because the next part, once you've started to work out what you're trying to get to, I always think about how do you actually get there? Where do you get inspiration from? Where do you find fresh thinking? And I was asked that, where do you find inspiration from and fresh thinking for your ideas or the things that you want to do?
Well, I think the fresh thinking just comes from being curious, doesn't it? Is that curious about your industry, curious about people, curious about different sectors, how they do things, and inspiration for me in terms of sort of a business sense and planning definitely comes through all of that. It comes through the blue sky thinking that you have. Is that in previous times we might have done over a glass of wine, or, you know, sort of sat front row at a show and someone just going, do you know what would be amazing if? And you're like, yes, that would be amazing. And that, you know what is that? And you hear those sort of messages from different angles, and then you start to think, well, okay, what could we do? What is the art of the possible? I guess the way my mind works is that there's 1,000,001 ideas that sort of come to life, and so I commit them to a mind map. I love mind map tech.
That's brilliant.
Because then it allows you just to kind of follow a train of thought, and it's on paper, and then you can start to create the links and start to create the themes and start to create the programs and start to make sense of sometimes what seems to be 1,000,000 ideas that are going on in your head. And so, yeah, my team are probably sort of quite challenged around me, as they're like, so if you just put it down on paper. I was like, I'll start with a mind map and then I'll share that with you and try and translate it through.
That's great. Mind maps are absolutely brilliant, because, you know, half the challenge I think for people is getting stuff down. If it just sits in your head, you'll never do anything with it, and you forget about it. It's like, you know, you can write a song in your head and go, oh, that's the best song ever, and then you forget it. And it's a good thing to get into. People just go and look up mind maps, and it'll show you how to do them. We've got a question actually based on that. We've got a question based on that from Nicola. Nicola from Berkhamsted. And Nicola says she'd love to hear how you see the role of social media evolving as part of the future of fashion, and maybe what innovations do you anticipate the BFC will be involved with, and how it can enhance creativity and commerciality for the fashion industry.
Yeah, so I mean, social media has become such a large part of not only our programs and our ways to communicate, but that's of designer businesses as well. And one of the great things about social media, I think, is that for designers that historically had to get in front of traditional media, and I'm definitely not advocating that we move completely away from traditional media, because, you know, the idea of endorsement from an expert is still incredibly valid and very exciting. But you have this opportunity to tell your story in different ways, and you tell it in your voice. And that's been one of the brilliant things, I think, of social media. Is that now the fact a lot of it is connecting to commerce, and transactional, of course, is the natural next step. And I think that's one of the exciting things of partnerships with the likes of TikTok, and, you know, we've worked with Instagram, of course, over many years, is that it's really thinking about how you use this power of audience to convert into fans, to convert into being a consumer. And really build the loyalty through the continued telling of story, and help people to understand as a designer business where you're coming from.
And a slightly different tack here, but I'm always interested whenever we speak to leaders who are creating the future and making big change. What are the key things that they have learned? The reason I ask this is because, you know, often we hear a lot about this idea of the fail fast culture, which I actually hate. I mean, I know what it means, and it's great if you live in San Francisco and you're in a startup. The reality is that in a lot of businesses, fail fast is a bit of an anathema. And the reality is it's more about learning fast. So it's all about how can you test and learn, test decisions quickly, create things, put them out in the world. Yeah. It creates learnings. And, you know, everyone's just had the most incredible 12 months. We've been talking about this, and it means we're going to have to reflect on the future. What are a couple of huge learnings that you've had this year that have impacted how you're thinking about the future?
Gosh, big question. I mean, there've been so many learnings this year, hasn't there, in terms of, I guess, is that really connecting with people on different levels. And I think is that as we've, you know, whether that's business or personally, or, you know, reaching out for new sales campaigns, is that historically is that you had these mechanisms that allowed you to be able to communicate. So whether that's sort of a London Fashion Week or social media, but because everybody's doing digital and there's no physical, is that there's just so much. So it's how do you create those true connections? And I think is that reflecting on that is that actually, and, you know, talking to a lot of designers as well, is that maybe used to do big fashion shows, is that actually what's the core audience that you're talking to? Is that who do you really need to reach to get this message across? who do you really need to reach in terms of opening up the opportunity for your business? And I think having a bit more focus and really thinking about sort of those true connections is really exciting. And when we're thinking about, how do we create real change in the industry through the Institute of Positive Fashion, is that has to be through creating really authentic connections that stand the test of time. And those aren't necessarily the leaders in industry, but they will also be, citizens that want to create action themselves. And, the exciting thing is really thinking through how we start to form those connections and how we communicate with those individuals so that we can not just as an organisation be the catalyst for change, but the UK can be this catalyst for change.
Wonderful. I'd certainly like to think about, kind of actions and things that businesses needs to take, or certainly the fashion industry needs to take in shaping the future. And we've got another question here from Anthony. It's very relevant actually, because if you think about British fashion, and as I remember growing up and coming down to London and going down Carnaby Street and all the loads of little independent shops, not so much the high street, but those places in Soho, there's places all over London that you used to visit. Sadly, a lot of those great little brands, and indeed the big brands, are disappearing from the high street. And that was a challenge clearly before Brexit and before COVID. It's even more of a challenge now. How optimistic are you about the future of, let's just call it the high street, or kind of the retail business? And what do people need to think about as we go forward? That's a question from Anthony Robbins.
Yeah, it's that you're right, is that everyone had been talking about the challenge of the high street for many years, and there's lots of things, lots of interventions I think that retailers would ask for in terms of, business rates often are the biggest challenge, not necessarily the landlords that they're working with. And so is that there has to be this industry and government partnership to think about shaping the cities, the towns, the villages that we live in the UK, to make sure that retail is protected, because fashion retail actually is one of the biggest leisure activities. It's one of the biggest reasons why we have tourism, for people to come here as a leisure activity and to be able to shop. And I think particularly over the past year is that we've seen this trend, haven't we, for people shopping locally. And you're right, is that every high street used to have small, incredible boutiques and that personal service and that personal connection. And I think whether you're a department store or you're a local independent, is that personal service and experience is going to be what is absolutely essential for survival. And not just survival, actually, for thriving, for being this great mecca for individuals, is that who want to go out and to learn about fashion, to experience, maybe new cultures in a retail environment. And so, I am hopeful, but there definitely needs to be some closer dialogue between the industry and government, and that's local government, to really think about how we tackle things like business rates, because of course it's that businesses should contribute, but they can't do it at the detriment of actually disappearing altogether and causing challenges around employment and all of the social challenges coming if you don't have things like vibrant high streets for individuals to socialise in when we can get back to socialising post the rollout of the vaccination programme.
Yeah, I mean, I never saw 10 years ago something like Topshop, what happened. But I mean, clearly, there's just such an enormous amount of change. And for some people, I guess, we've got another question, which I'm going to lean on a little bit from Maddie Pope, which is, if you are about to move into fashion as an industry, if you're an undergraduate, it feels very enticing and very exciting and a great opportunity. That's how I like to look at things. But I guess it can also feel quite challenging and quite difficult. Maddie's question is, what advice do you have for non-fashion undergraduates, I guess, and fashion graduates, anyone thinking about their career in the industry after graduation?
I mean, it is a difficult year, I think, is that everybody's hearing about these businesses going, and of course unemployment. And I think as an industry, we've got to think about actually what are the opportunities for all of the individuals that have been involved in retail for the future. And I do think is that there's opportunity around move towards circularity and sustainability, because that will mean new roles throughout the UK, new business models and exciting new things to come. But I guess is that advice is really just, learn your subject matter. Is that we have so many different CVs that come through the door, and to really, really have that passion point. And I know that many do, but have the confidence to show it. Is that when you're at interview, is that, and I get it, is that interviews can be daunting. I'm sure they can at any age, but you've got to let your personality and let the passion for the industry show through, because that's what we're looking for. We're looking for individuals that really care, that really want to be part of an industry, and have got a point of view to bring to the party. And so don't be afraid, is that we're certainly not looking for cookie cutter individuals to join our organisation. And I think that's the same in most organisations these days. So, be yourself and let that shine through.
It's interesting you said that about interviews, because I just wrote a toolkit that I've been giving out for anyone who's going for an interview at the moment. If you look me up on LinkedIn, there's a free toolkit actually to help people through the interview process. And I'm always amazed at how we think about the interview process as kind of an interrogation. Because Teju, I think it's Teju, hopefully I've got your name correct, ask what advice for newcomers to enter the fashion industry. And on that point of interviews, I think the key thing is to remember it's not an interrogation. It's not a one-way conversation. And like you say, it is the opportunity to have a two-way conversation. And the two-way conversation starts with, this is what I bring to the table. This is what I'm about. This is why I love what I'm doing. And then asking you questions, I always talk about this thing about people going for interviews should think of themselves as the buyer, not just the seller. Yeah. But why do I, what am I going to get out of this? Why should I work with you? Why should, how can you help me grow? And I think that's really, really important to have that kind of mindset shift, full stop. Yeah. But of course, part of the role of the British Fashion Council, as you sort of insinuated a little bit there as well, but is to really power up, I guess, and highlight that incredible talent that works within British fashion. And you can see it from the history. See, we talked earlier about McQueen, things like that. How do you kind of highlight that talent, and how do you collaborate with that talent to bring it to the fore? So it really kind of unleashes that. It really is unleashing the future of British talent, British fashion, because it's the talent that needs to come through. How do you do that?
Well, I guess firstly to recognise that we know that talent isn't just in terms of design, but is that, as an organisation, the British Fashion Council is about having members that are designer businesses. So creativity is absolutely front and centre for us. And so, I think that we've got the best talent support pathway in the world, is that we do everything from work with industry experts to think about scouting talent from universities. We support scholarships to make sure that individuals that maybe wouldn't have access to universities or, the resources to create their final collections have the resources to do that. And then we have our new gen scheme that I was saying is now got a brilliant partner in terms of TikTok. And that is about giving a platform to creativity. So the best creativity that we have in the UK, to give it a platform, show them at London Fashion Week. But behind the scenes, there's a huge amount of mentoring that goes on, is that connecting them with professional services, making sure that they've got all their contracts, is making sure that they're in contact with production agencies, they understand about merchandising, about marketing, about logistic partners, about retail strategy. Is that there's a whole machine that goes on behind the scenes. It's not just about these brilliant businesses that show at London Fashion Week. And then we look at the progression moment. So what's the opportunity for growth? Are you kind of business that's maybe single product led that has the opportunity for fast growth, or are you going to be developing in sort of quite a considered way and think about limited distribution, and so it's really helping businesses shape the kind of business they want to be. And the great thing and challenging thing about the fashion industry is that there isn't just one business model that you follow, is that there are so many different ones. And so it's having that support. And, we really couldn't do it without the partners that put into our charity. Clearpay actually underwriting some of our talent support schemes to make sure that in a year that's quite difficult for fundraising, we're able to continue to do that. And so we have our fashion trust grants that are about growth. We have our fashion funds with Vogue and GQ that are really about sort of empowering the best creative talent to grow. And one of the things we're now looking at is, how do we really maybe signal to the investment community that these businesses are definitely investable, is that they're not just creative, but there's great business savvy there as well. And so watch this space to see how we can really think about shaping that part of the missing piece of that jigsaw puzzle.
Great, thank you. Just while we're on the subject of next generation talent as well, Cecilia has asked, it's an advice question, but what advice do you have for event design graduates aspiring to work in production companies creating fashion shows, given, of course, that there are no live fashion shows, but potentially in the future? What would you recommend?
Oh gosh, sorry, is that Ruby the dog joining in again?
Ruby's got a great point of view on it.
She really does, if only we could hear it. Is that the great thing is that production companies actually this year have also pivoted their business. So they're not just around fashion shows or dinners or big events. They're also about creating these environments in which you could film content. Is that a lot of them have pivoted to creating digital platforms to enable you to do that. But it will return. We are expecting is that to go back to being able to do fashion shows, because there is something in the alchemy of the live event, of the physical moment, of bringing together the best in industry to sort of see that unveiling of a creative collection. And so is that take heart, is that there will be opportunity. But I have to say is that hats off to the events companies that we've been working with over the last few years. Is they always have a million ideas. So back to creativity isn't just about design, it's about everybody around them, whether it's the marketing teams, the PR companies, the journalists, even the way that they approach covering fashion in the UK is different. We have all of these brilliant independent magazines and fanzines and everything else coming through. And production companies are exactly the same, is that we have great creativity here that have enormous ideas that work not just events in London, but events around the world. And so you've picked a great industry, is good luck.
And creativity is one side of it, of course, which is great. So Cecilia, I hope that gives you a real insight in the excitement, the opportunity in the industry that's coming. But also, of course, on the other side, there's the financial side, there's the commercial side, there's this blend of creativity and commercial. And Anne asks, what's your advice for brand founders regarding funding? And how do they go about getting funding? And how do they do it? Where could they go to? And what have you seen? What might they do? Because again, unleashing their talent from that side.
Absolutely. I think is that it's really important to think about the kind of partners that you want, is that, to really do your research, to have a very solid business plan that you believe that you can deliver on, not just something that's fantasy on a piece of paper. It's about, again, quite a lot of it is about chemistry with the investors. Is do they believe in you? Sometimes they believe in you and not necessarily what you've got on paper, but they believe that they've got an opportunity to work with you to shape that, to create something exciting. And you hear time and time again from the investment community that it is down to the founders as whether they invest or not. So is that, be really true to your vision. Don't try and shape it just to get the cash, is that you've got to believe in what you're doing to be funding the right kind of business. And be really mindful of sort of how much you're giving away, is that what you're prepared, how much control you're willing to give away to do that. And quite often when we're talking to designer businesses, and one of the reasons why we've built this talent support pathway is to help the businesses get to enough traction before they have to think about investment, because then they've learned some of the lessons with their own cash along the way, without having to go through some of those challenges when they've got investment money, because that can often be quite a challenging experience to get through. Having said that, is that we know some brilliant investors, I think particularly through this year, when you hear from some of the designers of partners and investors that have literally been with them hand in hand, figuring out how to come through this, full belief in their business, that they're going to, continue to grow when we're through this challenging year. And that's the kind of partner that you want to go for. Perfect.
And we've had quite a lot of interest in the Institute of Positive Fashion, of course, because that certainly is definitely, tackling one of the key issues that we talked about earlier. And a couple of questions, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your name correct, Chidabem and Lena Vaz, talking about the circularity economy and the idea of obviously sustainable fashion businesses, but their question is, what has the BFC got planned for encouraging circularity across the industry, and what are the kind of key opportunities that you're seeing for this?
Well, I think if I tackle the second bit first, is that there are some great businesses that are already starting to pop up that are thinking about sort of how they provide more opportunity for circularity. So whether that's sort of use of upcycled, recycled materials, many of our young designer businesses that are starting out only want to start with materials that are already in use and not new raw materials that will come through. But there are some quite big challenges we've got to overcome to get there. And so we've literally just commissioned a research project to look at what that pathway and interventions would be for the UK to really lead in this area. One of the great things from a UK perspective is that we are leaders in terms of collecting waste from industry and post-consumer waste. But at the moment that then gets shipped off to places like Africa, it's not necessarily going back into the system. So, really looking at the interventions around recycling units, chemical recycling, what does that look like? Really think about, all of the challenges around the labeling that makes all of that possible. And so that research is now underway. We plan to have sort of the first parts to share for that come September. And quite uniquely, it's not just looking at what we do as an industry, but it's looking at what the role that government plays in that, policy plays, but also the role of the consumer. Is that we are all consumers of fashion and we all have to play our part in terms of responsibility. And if we're going to be truly circular, is that we will have to do our part, play our part in that as well. So watch this space. Is that we're really excited about it as a research project, is that it means it'll provide a great opportunity to really bring everyone from designer businesses to fast fashion to government to the whole waste ecosystem around the table to look at what we can do to fast track our route to circularity in the UK.
Wonderful. And obviously we've talked about this a little bit, but the world changing so rapidly. And you mentioned earlier that you were looking at other industries and other businesses that might help inspire some of your thinking, especially around diversity and inclusion. But I just wanted to go back to that, because I always think it's really interesting to hear from CEOs where else, outside of their own industry, who's doing what they want to do really, really well. Who do you look at and go, I think we could learn from that company? You'd have to name companies, by the way, but that industry.
Yeah. Or
there's lots of learnings there that we really could be doing and recycle. I have this big thing about stealing elegantly. Where can you copy from? Yeah, steal elegantly, right? There's all the challenges and puzzles that you're facing. Someone else has solved them somewhere else in some shape or form. So if we use our vision and move really, really laterally, there's some people that you could steal from, right? So what would you steal and who from? Don't have to name company names.
Well, I think I've already mentioned Airbnb, haven't I?
Yeah,
right. I have to say, as a business, is that if you think about what they've done in the whole experience space, because obviously for them, is that it's been a real challenge around the world. Is that the whole idea of sort of going and staying in someone's house for a week or a month or whatever it is that has pretty much been put on pause. But the whole experience economy, and particularly online, has been incredible. And then is that to step kind of behind the scenes, is that knowing some of the team that work there and understand the way that they approach things like sort of diversity, inclusion, and how they really use the teams within the business to help shape policy. Is really inspiring. So you're absolutely right, is that you should look at businesses that you admire and look at businesses that are doing things differently or have just sort of taken on a slightly new angle. And you can learn as much from people that you think are doing things that are completely crazy you'd never even touch, as much as you do the ones that you really admire. Is that I think quite often as you learn from others' mistakes of things that you would never do as much as you do from people that you would really like to copy and emulate. So is that it's always been sort of switched on and curious, isn't it? Is why are they doing that? Is that what's their end game with that, and where are they going with this, and what's the culture behind that business, and what are the values of that business? And I think we should all be asking that. Back to your comment about going for an interview is that you should be asking people, what's the culture in this
Completely.
organization? Is that can I speak to anyone else in the team and hear from them is that what they think of this as an organization? It shouldn't just be them taking references on you. You should be taking references on them.
Yeah, totally right. It's about reframing things. I think it's that, I love that. It's definitely about being curious. It's definitely about being lateral. It's definitely about changing things like your language, your perspective, reframing things. And of course, unleashing action in the way that you do, Caroline, it's not easy. I mean, I'm working with you kind of firsthand, and I can see the amount of work that is being done and you're going through, and the kind of decisions that need to be made. But of course, there's very few spaces at the very top of all industries, at CEOs. So when we have an opportunity to speak to CEOs, I always do ask them, what top tips, doesn't have to be a whole load, but maybe one or two, would you give for people who really want to go out there and create the impact and create the future that they want to see? From a CEO's perspective, what would you give them to leave this session tonight to go away and think about?
Ooh, there are so many out there. I think from a business perspective, is that my advice would be to empower your team. Is that you absolutely can't do it yourself. Even if you're a control freak, which sometimes I might feel that I slightly am, is that empower your team, because you hire them because they're experts, or you hire them because you think they have the opportunity to become experts, and they will only do that by being able to really sort of ideate and bring to fruition fantastic ideas. And the brilliant thing that I really enjoy seeing is that when younger members of the team join us, and they go from being not timid, but just sort of wanting to learn about the company, and then they come back to you with ideas of what you could do, or they've met someone at an event that they've networked, or through a friend of a friend who had this great idea, what do you think? And it's brilliant to be in a position to go and explore it more, find out what the opportunity is that, let's remember what our strategy is. If it fits to the strategy, go and figure it out and see if we've got an opportunity to bring it within the organization. And I think allowing people to really do that and grow is not just unleashing action, but it's actually unleashing potential as well within your team, which is really exciting. And then I think from a personal perspective is that just believe in yourself, believe in your point of view, believe in your values, and don't be afraid to try and make things happen. Is that sometimes is that you might be worried what people might say, to your point, are you going to fail? Is that I think if you work at something hard enough, and is that there are lots of external factors that sometimes create failure, but is that you will learn a huge amount along the way, and you might not always get to the point that you're aiming at, but the fact you've strived for it, you will probably get to something exceptional anyway.
Wow. What a way to end our session this evening. Caroline, thank you ever so much.
Thank you so much.
It was fantastic. I mean, I can see from all the questions that we've had and the engagement of the audience, I'm sure that they've had a brilliant insight into the future of fashion and what you are doing to shape it. And thank you for sharing that with us this evening. Of course, London Fashion Week starts on Friday. Right? And
Friday the 19th, londonfashionweek.com.
So yeah, you can go there and get involved. So once again, Caroline Rush, the CEO of the British Fashion Council, thank you so much for being a part of Boom Time this evening. And all of you who signed up and watched and got involved, thank you ever so much once again. You're a great audience and a great crowd. And we hope that you've enjoyed this, and keep telling everybody about it. Get more people to sign up. Next month, we have another incredible guest. We have Rankin, who is going to join us for our Boom Time session. And I think that will be March the 25th. But obviously, more details are to follow. Caroline, once again, I can see here we've got some incredible. It's just literally going, thank you, thank you, thank you. Great session. Thank you, thank you. So really, genuinely, thank you. And for everyone out there, and to Caroline, until we meet again next time, stay boom.